we're following Matt Rawle's book on the grace of Les Mis. And this week we are looking at what he calls the gift of love, the story of Marius and Cosette. And he says that like any great epic novel story has to have a love story. Of course, there's a lot going on in this story. But Hugo, of course, had to include a love story, and this is the sort of the real centerpiece of that story. And so I was sort of thinking about that, how he claims that every great epic has a love story, and I was thinking about, of course, the Bible, and how we could say that the Bible itself is a love story of God with God's people, with God's world, with God's creation, and some of the difficulties along the way, and some of the efforts at reconciliation, and how all that happens through sacrifice and through different kinds of things. And I can kind of see that here in this story. Marius and Cosette, they go through a whole lot in this story, and probably a lot more in the novel than in the musical. And so I'm glad that we have Katie Sumner back with us again this week. She's our expert. She's read the actual novel, and so
that does not make you an expert.
But Katie, I'm kind of curious. So, kind of setting this love story up for us, and what's kind of going on, and who are these characters, to remind us as we get into this.
So, Mary, if you're a fan of the play and the Broadway musical, you have Seth just came home. You can hear him. This is what I hear every night as a conference call. So you have kind of two different thoughts. In the musical, they only meet 2 times, which kids at home, that's not how you fall in love with someone. So yeah, they only meet 2 times. They only have 2 scenes before they kind of have this runoff married. So they don't really get, you have the love story, but it doesn't really develop like it does in the novel. In the novel, they meet several times. He first sees her walking with Valjean and he pays somewhat of attention, is attracted to her. And then the second time, they kind of have a brush with each other. And it's Epiphany that kind of figures out where she lives, and Marius sneaks and sees her in this garden, and they have a dozen times that they go and they see each other, and they actually get a true love story. They talk, they share, ideas, feelings, and she's terrified to tell Valjean about it. And then eventually Valjean decides that they should move to London, he and Cosette, to run away from Javert capturing him again. And when Marius finds out that she's leaving, he decides that there's nothing to live for. And that's when he goes and joins the whole brigade, the whole rebellion.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Cosette is worried about Valjean, who being protective and sort of being the only constant presence in his life, the only kind of good thing that's happened to him. And she senses that he doesn't want to lose that and really wants to hold on to her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that about the musical, because I have felt that too. Like they just saw each other a couple of times, and all of a sudden, like, they're getting married. One day.
We're getting married. Yeah.
So that took a long time, and a lot of get-togethers, and maybe even letters back and forth and things like that.
It was just about a dozen times, though, in the novel that they meet each other in the garden. So even then, like, it's not it's a very rushed, young, naive romance. I mean, I'm not.
Well, he only had 1,400 pages to work with, so I
mean, that's fine. So yeah, it's kind of it was very much like that 1800s. Like, we've met each other. This is it. We're getting married. We know nothing about each other.
Yeah, that love, just really naive young love.
Yeah. But we're gonna make it work. And I do feel that, like, it is that we're 18, we know better. He knows, even his grandfather, he doesn't think will accept Cosette because he doesn't think she has a large dowry, and he's left the grandfather at this time. But come to find out, like, Valjean has put away a lot of money for her dowry.
Yeah. Wow. So Matt Rawle, he kind of talks about, like, she had a rough upbringing with the Thénardiers, I guess, and, had really, but by the time Valjean comes along, I mean, she's kind of pampered, she's well looked after, and maybe she's either, suppressed, some of the rough upbringing, but it is kind of naive. It's sort of this ingenue kind of person on the streets of Paris. And Marius had kind of had would you say, a similarly sort of privileged upbringing with, I know the conflict with his grandfather, who was very much opposed to Napoleon, right? And that sort of empire. And whereas his father fought with Napoleon and was a kind of a war hero.
Yes.
So. And
the grandfather keeps Marius away from the father until the death. And he finds out that the father would come when Marius would go to church. The father would come to the church and sit so he could watch his son. And he kind of finds all this out, which leads him to, like, leave the grandfather he has like 30 francs in his pocket, and he goes and lives in, like, the horribleness of France. And how everyone is connected in the story. His father's life was saved by Thénardier, who pretended to fought in the battle, but did not. He was actually looting bodies, found him and rescued him. So he tells Marius, if you ever meet this man Thénardier, do whatever you can to save him.
Very interesting.
Yeah, they're all like, he did a great, it's almost like Harry Potter-esque, like everyone's connected in this weird circle. They don't have, everyone has strange connections back to each other, but they don't figure out.
Uh-oh.
Hang up, oh no.
She's leaving us hanging. They don't figure out. Well, I hope she'll be able to rejoin us here in a second. Andrew, it was also Matt Rawle, our studies author, was talking about how sort of impressionable Marius was, and how he kind of would sort of follow the latest philosophy or the latest political idea. He started off, in one way, and then kind of with his grandfather, and then he learned about his father, kind of took on his father's pro-Napoleonic kind of side, and then in the end sided with the revolutionaries, and sort of, maybe somewhat out of desperation because of it looked like Cosette was heading out of town. But I think he made an interesting thing in there, which is a lot of times our perspectives are so much influenced by the people around us and the people that we look up to, the people whose perspectives we value. And I wonder, I certainly have experienced that, I think, in my life, and wonder maybe how you've experienced that or witnessed that in folks.
Absolutely. Like, I think you're exactly right. The people that we are initially exposed to, oftentimes we think like that because that's what we know. And I remember reading a book in college. It was a book by Stanley Hauerwas. It was his autobiography. He's a professor at Duke Divinity School. And I remember reading that book and being like, oh my gosh, I've always thought some of these things, but I've never been able to express them on my own. And it was kind of a neat way for me to broaden my horizons a little bit and understand something new in a different way. And that was like, I remember one of the first times I remember reading something and being like, there's more to how I just grew up and what I know now. And the more we read and the more we interact with different people and different perspectives opens us up to learning and becoming more educated and more understanding of people who aren't like us. And I think that's such a great thing. And you're right. Marius is exposed to different thoughts and ideas, and he's able to adapt and change based on his circumstances. But I think overall he ends up being a better person because of that.
Yeah. I think it also maybe helps me have a little bit more compassion or sympathy for folks who maybe see things very differently than I do, maybe about different things, to just sort of be able to say, they've had different influences. They've maybe looked up to different people. And so they're just as much influenced maybe by that as I've been influenced by important people. So, Katie, you're back.
I know. I don't know what happened.
Well, we're glad to have you back. We were just talking about how Marius sort of goes through different political persuasions, largely by the people who have influenced him. And sometimes it's sort of following those people. Sometimes it may be, sometimes we can believe what we want to believe to be different from. Like, I remember I went through a period where I was going to believe some different things than my parents did, sort of as part of that rebellion kind of thing, I guess. But Rawle makes the point in here that Hugo says, Hugo seems to want us to know how fickle we can be. Regardless if monarchy or republic is the best form of governance, Marius seems to be conditioned to accept the latest philosophy he hears. And Andrew and I were talking about how we maybe have experienced that or witnessed that. What do you think?
I think that's true, but I think he was kind of harsh with Marius about just believing any political ideal, because even when he joins the rebellion, like, he doesn't fully believe in it. He only does it because he thinks she's leaving. Like, he's like, what else have I got to lose? So I'm not sure like he 100% believes in it. I thought he was kind of harsh on him on that. But I think that's true as we age, and like you were saying, I'm not sure that's fair. Even with like stories in the Bible, like as a child, I was very harsh. Like, man, I would never do any of those things. How would you say that? You're a horrible person. And now you're an adult and you're like, oh, that's all of us.
Right.
And, you kind of, I would never be Simon Peter. Or I would never be this. And then you realize, like, yes, I would. Like, just kind of grow up and your naivety leaves you, and you realize, like, how, I wouldn't even say fickle, but you just kind of see things from different perspective.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say it. I was wondering if he was a little bit harsh on that, because sometimes our ideas can evolve. We can change our mind, and for good reason, with exposure to new ideas and things like that. And
I think that's kind of how I took it too. Like, Katie, when you were off before you got back on, I said, he's exposed all these different ideas, and in the end, I think he's really better off for it. Because he has different understandings of these political persuasions and what they mean and what they represent.
Yeah. And he realizes too that they, like, because he goes back to the grandfather, and I think they realize that, and this is what I think we all need to realize, we all can live together.
Yeah.
We all, like, even if you have like a different set, you can still be respectful and be like, and still work things through.
Yeah.
He kind of comes full circle, starting with his grandfather and then kind of ending it in reconciling with him. Maybe not coming around politically to where he was, but being able to at least have that relationship with him.
Mhm.
And that was the only thing I didn't like about the book. Was so Cosette and Marius decide to get married, and they do, and Valjean basically is like, here's my whole life in a nutshell. I was this bad guy, this bad guy, this bad guy. And Marius is like, come nowhere near us.
Right.
And you're
Yeah.
kind of like, dude, you just fought in this rebellion. You met all these people in these Hubble type situations. Like, where are you judging? And I just didn't feel like it was, I felt like it was like he was writing all of a sudden a completely different person. And I was like, whoa, where did this come from?
Hmm.
But
That
I guess,
Marius was a very different, portrayed very differently, right? Marius.
well, in the fact, like, all of a sudden, you know, he had no problems accepting all these people. And then all of a sudden he does Valjean.
Right.
And I was like, wait a minute. So that was, but I think it also deals with what Matt Rawle is talking about. He's a fickle person. So it was like, I could deal with these people being bad, but not my father-in-law.
Yeah.
It's also frustrating to me, like hearing this story and knowing Valjean technically told the truth of where he came from and what he had done, but he doesn't tell the full truth. Like, he doesn't go on to say, but, you know, I raised Cosette, I did all these good things. He leaves all that out, which is incredibly frustrating to me.
Like that part, like everything up to that, I was like, I'm good. And then you got to that and I was like, what? I don't understand.
Yeah.
And I also kind of was hurt by Cosette, like, and this made me think of the whole Bible passage, like a son will leave his family to go be with his wife. It made me think of that because it was like, she just totally is like, okay, that's fine. We'll not talk to him. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
She kind of writes Valjean off too, doesn't she?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it all works out in the end, but more by luck than by anything intentional. Like, it would have been great if the marriage could have been a means of truth and reconciliation for them, but it turns out just this chance encounter that Marius has with Thénardier, who tells him the truth about what Valjean had done for him. He'd saved his life and did tell him about the good. So, yeah. It's kind of weird how it all works out in the end.
I thought it was interesting that the book obviously focused, or this chapter really focused more on the love between Marius and Cosette. But I thought that really the crux of the whole, in my opinion, from watching the musical, which I know doesn't mean much, but for me, I think the crux of the relationships, the thing that it really balances on is really Valjean's love for Cosette. Like, that's his sacrificial love that allows him to give up things in order to make sure that she's safe. Like, to me, that's the relationship that I think the main type of love that we see is in that story of that relationship between kind of a father and daughter. That makes way for the relationship with Marius and Cosette, but wouldn't happen otherwise.
Right. Well said. Yeah, I agree. I think that's the primary love relationship, if you will, here. And it's got all the qualities, like you said, of what we in the Christian faith lift up as love. It's self-sacrificial, it's self-giving, it's what's good for the other, even at great cost to one's own self. And yeah, you're right. Yeah. So with that having said, I really like that. I did like one of the things in the chapter that he wrote. He wrote this, or I wanted to talk about this. He said, he writes, marriage is one of God's greatest gifts, offering us the opportunity to practice fidelity, trust, and sacrificial living for the building of a present and future hope. Of course, marriage isn't the only way to become a living sacrifice, but in the context of Les Mis, it's abundantly clear that Marius and Cosette's love for each other is the vehicle through which hope is discovered. So like with someone who has a wedding, a marriage anticipating coming up here soon, I'm like, that's heady stuff. That's some high talk about marriage. And how did you all respond to that?
I think that's true. It's sorry, Andrew, but it's a daily self-sacrifice of just trying to put someone else's needs above your own, and more so when you have children. And it is that feeling, and I think that God, that's why he continuously references Christ as the bridegroom.
Speaking of marriage, and right, there we go.
Good answer.
Did you? I'm assuming as I'm talking about it, yeah.
That's right. It's good.
Andrew, you need to ask if this counts as one of your marriage counseling classes.
yeah. I feel like it should. I feel like it.
Oh, wow.
You know, I mean, even looking at like the marriage vows, that's some really heavy stuff. You know, love and cherish, honor and keep, sickness and health.
I don't know if you guys can see them. These are our vows, and we wrote our own.
Oh, wow.
Sweet.
And so we wrote them down after we got married, and Seth did his in his own writing, and I did mine, and they hang in our bedroom.
That's great. Wow.
So that was kind of our promise to each other, and we showed them beforehand just so we could compare. But we did do what we wanted to say to each other.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So yeah. And I just, for everyone at home, you need to know someone more than 12 times. I'm just going to do that.
Yeah. Wow.
For sure. Like 13, well, that's a good number, right?
Yeah.
13, yes. That's what you know.
Wow. So in the chapter, Rawle kind of says this story is kind of the bright spot in the midst of a lot of bleak and dark and heavy and troublesome stuff, and that Hugo's purpose maybe in including this was to give hope, to give I don't know what was kind of, how does this storyline, this love story, function in the midst of everything else that's happening in this story? What are we to take from this story?
I think as Christians, one of the things we've seen over this past 2 weeks almost now is we are a group of people that wants hope. We that's what we're all living for at the moment, is a sense of hope that this ends and it goes away. And we have the hope and promise in Christ that we're not alone, and that this isn't the best part. And I think that kind of is the same feeling. But I also feel like through my Christianity this week, I have seen that we're not alone, that Christ never intended us to be a body that was one by themselves. My small group, we've messaged each other just about the last couple of days to check on each other. The parents for Keith, we've all sent different messages out, and Katie Belk has sent us resources, and the kids are going to participate in a Zoom meeting of their own tonight.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so I really feel like as a Christian community, what this shows me is you're not alone. We're always looking for a helpmate, a person to cast those burdens on, to talk with, to walk with Christ together. I don't think he ever meant for us to walk by ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well said. Well said. Yeah. I was also thinking too.
Expensive.
No, yeah. Andrew, yeah, anything on that?
Yeah, no.
Taking it in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree, and it's been kind of neat to see like things like marriages have continued. Andrew presided at a wedding in the Gathering last Friday afternoon, and of course he's got his own wedding that in some way or another is going to take place.
Oh my gracious!
So those things, and they had the drive-through shower, which was on the news. I think it was awesome. But also I was thinking how, at the very end of Revelation, the end of it all, the consummation of history is portrayed as a sort of as a wedding, as a marriage of Christ with Christ's people, and the wedding feast. And so I think, I don't know if Hugo was drawing on that sort of idea from the scriptures, but the prophets talked about it. Isaiah, some others talk about how a marriage and a wedding feast, and that sense of community, Katie, like you were just talking to, the beloved community that Martin Luther King talked about. I mean, that's really, that does give us hope. That does help us persevere in the midst of difficult times. And so I'm grateful that this love story is a part of the big epic story, and I think it does maybe function to give us some hope and some hope for a future that they'll carry on, and their love will continue and blossom and bring about great things. So
I would also just like to say I'm glad that we did Revelations when we did, because I think like through these times I've read so many people like trying to quote Revelations and things, and I'm like, I'm really glad that we did this as a church group when we did. I feel like it's really helped my understanding of all that right now.
Yeah, amen.
So glad to hear you say that.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, we talked about this. Those lamps are like, so it's kind of made me get like, look at that and remember what we had discussed. So I was like, oh, I've enjoyed that.
Oh, wait a minute. I see 4 horsemen coming down the street.
Sorry. One did bring a plague. That's all.
That's right. Very good. Well, anything else about Marius or Corsette that strikes us, or this chapter, or anything for the time being?
I think you're right. Like, without this love story, it really is a very miserable, there is no hope. Without this love story, there's really no hope. So with it, we're able to experience kind of the fullness of that grace and hope that we don't see in the rest of the narrative. So I think it's really important.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very good. I love that it took place in Paris. I mean, what a great city for love, and
that's right. Yeah.
And revolution and all that kind of stuff too. So,
well, but I will say, I would not change what I'm going through right now for 1832 France. So when you read the novel, no way.
Sure.
Well said. Yeah, that's right. Count our blessings.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Katie. Thank you for joining us and helping to round out our knowledge and understanding of the whole big picture. That just means so much. So you bring
You're
a lot.
welcome.
Really appreciate it. Well, we'll gather together again. We're still trying to figure out the technology and what sort of platform works best. So, but whoever has joined in with us in this way, we appreciate your being a part of this, and hope it's been helpful to you and encouraging. So let's go and be people of love and continue to build up community with one another. Go in grace and peace.
Amen.